Hi, and welcome to our fourth session here at Numa TV. And today we're going to create our first real world application together. And this is going to be a two-part session, actually, where in the first part, we will deal with the user interface. And later in the private session at Numa, we will cover the code implementation. So for what we can do right now, let me show you a little image of what we are going to create, which is going to be a very simple calculator application. And when creating the user interface for this application, we're going to rely on something called a UI stack view, which is in addition to other auto layout capabilities that Xcode brings us, is a very great way to place user interface elements in kind of a stacked way, or it's also ordered horizontally or vertically, as it is with the buttons of a calculator. So without further ado, let's begin by creating a new single view application in Xcode. And if you, especially for everyone who joins us in the live session, in the private live session later, I'd suggest to follow along. So I'm going to bring up my Xcode window right here. And while I explain some additional things to our project, you might create this new single view application. I just named it calculator, and we in the past we have always worked with this kind of view where we can just see the view controller in this 600 by 600 pixel shape. But what we can also do, and this is going to help us, especially if we'd like to design for a specific size. And therefore, we will select this view controller and bring up our right sidebar here and make sure that we have selected the attributes inspector, which is the third symbol from the right. And then we can decide if we want to use a specific size. And I'd suggest that we go with the iPhone 4.7 inch in that case. So I'm going to select that. And now, as you can see, we do have kind of a different shape here in our Xcode window. And as a little refreshment when it comes to working with storyboards and code, I'd just like to demonstrate just a few steps that you might already remember, but after all, it's a good refreshment. So by placing an element like a button on our view controller's view, we get some lines here and that will help us position it, which might not be visible in the screen in the stream, but we have our guidelines here, and I'm just positioning this one in the center, and that's not the important part right now. The important thing is that when we want to deal with that in code, we can bring up our assistant editor. And Xcode and iOS development, when working together with storyboards and interface builder, is all about creating actions and outlets. So an outlet is nothing else but a property that will be defined in our view controller class, but it has a small prefix that's called IB outlet. So what I can do actually is also writing this myself, or I can let it write by Xcode, but let me just give you a quick demonstration right here. So I can write IB outlet, creating a variable, my button, for example, and this is going to be a UI button. And I have to put an exclamation mark here. And what I can do now is, in addition to creating an outlet, or let Xcode create an outlet for me, I can press Control on my keyboard, click on my button on the left side here, and then click drag to the right. And and there is a line actually, but in the stream this is not displayed, but you should see a line. And when I move it to the right, I can just release the mouse button, and then I have created a connection. And we can also see this connection if we select the button and head over to the connection inspector here in the on the right sidebar. And then you can see that there is a referencing outlet. And this outlet means that now our button corresponds with the view controller class. And there is another possibility that we have. So let me just remove that for a second again. And when I control click, or let's first of all have a look at the button again. And I want to remove my referencing outlet because why ever I decided to, I want to create a new outlet. Then I can do that by moving to this connection inspector and simply clicking this little X button right here. And now we have removed the connection. And if I want to create an outlet by letting Xcode do the work, I again press Control on the keyboard and drag it to the assistant editor. And then Xcode gives me a little window that is, again, not visible in the stream, but it asks me for the type of connection. And we can choose between 3 kinds of connections: an outlet, an action, or an outlet collection. And an outlet is what we just created. And an outlet collection would be pretty useful if we have many objects of the same kind, and we can kind of create an array of objects using this outlet connection. But that's not what we're going to do right now. And the action is nothing else but the function that is going to be triggered as soon as we interact with this specific UIKit object. This is different if you use a button or, for example, a slider. Then different kinds of actions are going to be created. So if I create now an outlet for my button again, I'm going to call it my button again, and click connect, and Xcode automatically created the same outlet that we just created by hand. And then the second thing that we can do actually is creating a function or an action, and we select, I just control clicked and dragged to the assistant editor, choose the connection type action, and maybe call this my button pressed, and hit enter. And as you can see, Xcode automatically created a function for me that which is called an IB action, and the IB actually stands for interface builder. So we have an interface builder outlet and an interface builder action here, and this is a function, my button pressed. And as parameters or arguments, we have only one parameter, which is sender any object. And the sender is actually where this event was triggered. So when we click or press the button, then actually our button is the sender. And this is going to be called an any object because our function event could have originated from any kind of UI component. So this is just a little refreshment on what we already did a few weeks ago, and you already know a lot about functions and classes and so on. And for now, we will simply remove the my button pressed and also the my button outlet, and we can also remove this button again. Let's have a look at our empty user interface, and let's see how we can actually create our calculator interface. So first of all, we're going to need some buttons, of course. So let's bring up the right sidebar again, and we already have selected a button here from our library. And I'm going to bring up one of those buttons, and then I'm going to make some adjustments right here in our button. For example, changing the background color to maybe a dark gray color. And I'm also going to change the text color, I have to scroll up a little here, to a white color. And as you can see, the button actually has a very specific size. And this is called an intrinsic content size, which is based on the amount of text written in the button. So this intrinsic content size is a very important aspect of auto layout, and also when using a UI stack view, because UI stack view does a lot of our auto layout stuff for us in the background. But for it to work, it needs to know the intrinsic content size of an element. So in addition to going now to the size inspector and changing my button size to, let's say, 60 by 60 pixels, what I like to do is scroll down here, selecting it. And we're going to deal with the intrinsic content size later, once we have created our stack view. But now let's position some of those buttons just like that. I'm going to copy them, paste them right here, and we need 4 per row. And it actually doesn't matter at all how we position them. I'm simply selecting all of the buttons as soon as they are in one line. This is actually the only important thing, because the UI stack view can infer if we want a vertical layout or a horizontal layout based on the positioning of those UI elements. So if I were to position those elements in a vertical way, the UI stack view would know, okay, now I should lay out all of these buttons vertically. So let's see what happens if we put them in a row and select them all. And then there is a tiny little icon here in the top, in the lower right corner, the last one actually in this set of icons, which is kind of a stag with an arrow to the bottom. And when I click that, you can see that every item I have selected is now within this UI stack view. And the size of each item is now based on the intrinsic content size of this specific button. So now let's change the intrinsic content size of all of those elements. So I'm going to select all of the buttons, pressing Shift on my keyboard, and then head over to my size inspector again and select intrinsic content size, and I select a placeholder. And then I can define 60 by 60 pixels. And this is really just a placeholder, which means that this is only affecting what we see in Interface Builder. When we would run our application in the simulator, our buttons would look exactly the way as they did before we set up the placeholder. And this is, we need to set those placeholders in order for auto layout to understand what we actually want. And later in code, we will change the intrinsic content size for every button in our application. So now that we have our buttons in our stack view, let me bring up the document outline here and select the stack view. We can make some adjustments. For example, when we click on the attributes inspector, we can change the spacing of our buttons. So I can simply say, okay, I want my buttons to be 10 pixels away from each other. So this looks pretty nice already. And now I can copy the whole stack view and paste it again. I'm just selecting my stack view in document outline, pressing Command C, pressing Command V, and then we have our second stack view right here. Let's put it on top of the first one, and then we have another one right here, and yet another one, so that we have actually four times those buttons that we're going to give a name in a second. So now that we have so many buttons, we have already aligned them in a horizontal way. Now, as I already told you, stack view can infer how something should be laid out by checking how it's actually positioned in our view. So we can actually select all of those stack views again, and as you can see, they are getting selected in the document outline as well, and then put it into another stack. And as you can see now, we have all the buttons connected together. And then I can select my stack view and again change the spacing to maybe again 10 pixels, something like that. And that's all there is to it. And now we can set actually some constraints for our stack view that we've already created. And what I like to do is actually, before we do that, create another view, which will be the display of our calculator. So I'm going to bring up a simple UI view, drag it to my storyboard, and then resize this kind of this way. Give it maybe another background color, which is black. And then I'm going to maybe add a little label, which is going to be the text that is going to be displayed in our calculator. And as you can see, once I've selected the label and move it to our view that we've just created, Xcode automatically changes the color because it knows it's a black background color. And so we should have kind of a white color to be visible with our label. And I'm going to release it right there. And now notice that the label is now positioned within the view that we just created. So now I'm going to position it a little in the lower right corner, but before that, I will enter a value, let's say 100. And I'm also going to increase the font size. Let's just do something big here. I'm going for the font and simply click the arrow up key. And I have to resize my label accordingly to see the changes. And then we will have to set up some auto layout constraints. And I'm now this looks okay to me. And I'm going to position it in the lower right corner of my view. And before setting up the constraints for our stack view and for the 100 label, I'm going to set some constraints for my view. And I'm going to press Control on my keyboard and click drag from my view. And I think you can only see the selections right now, but I'm going to release it on view. And again, this window won't be visible in the stream, so I'm explaining what I do right now. So I press Shift on my keyboard, and I'm selecting leading space to container margin, which is a constraint to the left, trailing space to container margin, which is a constraint to the right, and vertical spacing to top layout constraint, which is the position in relation to the top. And once I've selected those three constraints, I'm releasing the Shift key and pressing Enter on my keyboard. And then I have set up the constraints. And as you can see, they're still red here at some places because our auto layout engine is not yet satisfied with the positioning of our user interface elements. And this is because, for example, we don't have a specific height for our view here. We have to give him some kind of a height, and we will see that in a second. But for now, let's just fix the label position of our calculation label. I'm again selecting our label in the document outline, pressing Control on the keyboard, moving it to its super view, releasing it. And now I'm going to select trailing space to container and bottom space to container, both times keeping the Shift button pressed on my keyboard. And the trailing space is the space to the right, and the bottom space is the space to the bottom, actually. So I hit Enter on my keyboard, and as you can see now, we have two constraints here that will position our label in the lower right corner of our view. And our auto layout issues are going to disappear in a second once we give our stack view some constraints. And first of all, we'd like our stack view to have a fixed vertical spacing between the top button row and our view here, our black view. So I'm going to press Control on the keyboard again, click on my stack view, and drag it to the view and select vertical spacing. And that's all there is to it. And as you can see now, there is our vertical spacing constraint. And the next thing we should do is selecting our stack view again and add some constraints to the view itself, to the view of the view controller. So I'm selecting my stack view, and instead of pressing Control on my keyboard and so on, I'm now clicking on the second button from the right here in the lower right corner of our interface builder, which brings up the pin menu, which again, you won't be able to see in the stream. But what I'd like to do is, to the left, I enter 0. To the bottom, I enter maybe 20. And I click on those tiny little lines that resemble the symbol of a constraint that we could see right here. And I just select them and enter 0 to the right, 20 to the bottom, and 0 to the left. And then I can add those three constraints by clicking on the Add Three Constraints button at the bottom. And as you can see now, our stack view kind of changed, and there are also some issues here with a 32 pixel offset to the right and so on. But that doesn't matter. We can simply select our view controller right here and click on those issues, for example, which can be displayed by this red circle with a white arrow to the right. And once I select that, there are a lot of content priority, ambiguity, and so on. But there are also misplaced views. And this is what we should cover first. So we will simply select one of those exclamation marks and hit fix frames or update frames, and also apply this to all views in container. And then you can see it automatically changed the positioning of our view. And this was the first thing that we needed to adjust. Now let's select the stack view. And first of all, let's see what other options we actually have. So first of all, let's select all of the stack views that are placed within this super or mother stack view. And as you can see here, they are all laid out horizontally because Xcode knows we have positioned our buttons horizontally. So the layout should be horizontal. So now for the alignment, we can do different types of alignments here. At the moment, we would like to fill. So this means that everything should be filled by the elements placed in the stack view. But we should definitely adjust the distribution, which should maybe be equal spacing. And as you can see now, our buttons now have a pretty nice equal spacing, and this is actually exactly what we wanted. And please also notice that here in the top left corner, our little red circle changed to a yellow circle because now there are just some misplaced views. And actually, when working with a stack view, you're going to see that kind of often because Xcode does a lot of things in the background. But after waiting for a while, those issues are going to disappear. So with that, we have created our first user interface for a real-world app, but we need to make some further adjustments. For example, we will add now some values to our buttons. We will start with 0 here. Here is a C button. Equal sign 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then some operations here. Let's say plus, minus, multiplication, and division by /. All right. So with that, our user interface looks pretty complete. And we can also have a look at it on different devices. So I will close the right sidebar. I will close the document outline. We'll bring up the assistant editor. And then by selecting preview in the jump bar, we can have a look at how our calculator looks. For example, here on iPhone SE or 5S or 5. We can also have a look at the 4.7-inch, which would be a 6 Plus, which is exactly what we have here. So this looks pretty good already. But now for working together with these buttons and so on in code, what we should consider is something else that we can use pretty well, because we can work with something called tags. And sometimes this is useful, sometimes it's not. I think it might be useful for our case right here. So we will give every button here a tag. It could be 0 in this case, 1 for the 1 button. And actually, you can use tags to identify user interface objects in your code. And maybe we're going to use it, maybe not, but in this case, it's pretty useful to have those tags in place. So I'm going to give the 4 a 4, 5 is 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, and 9 right here. So with that done, we have completed our user interface, and we're now going to move to the private session. I hope you have enjoyed this live demonstration, and I'll see you soon.